The Golden State Killer, the East Area Rapist, the original Night Stalker.
His real name, Joseph DeAngelo. He's one of the most prolific serial killers and rapists in the country.
Do you feel any remorse for what you did to me?
This is her. Look at her face.
He is a predator of people. That's what he enjoyed doing.
We're taking a closer look at the case.
The only time that you were able to see a glimpse of the true monster, Joseph DeAngelo, was in his cell in those moments.
What's going on, YouTube? This is As Seen by Dave here in Goleta, California, which is just above Santa Barbara, talking to you about two murders committed by the Golden State Killer, Joseph James DeAngelo. First, we're going to talk a little bit about him, but welcome into my channel.
DeAngelo, I want you to look at me. I want you to look at me, DeAngelo, and I want you to remember what I have to say. First, I want to say, glory be to my Lord Jesus Christ for sustaining me with his peace, his love, his strength, and power over the last 44 years. Yes, DeAngelo, it's been 44 years. On October 5th, 1976, when you broke into my home in the early hours, just after my husband had left for work, and you shoved your knife into my neck, you bound my wrist and ankles, you blindfolded me, and then gagged me with a cloth. Remember that? But you also did the same to my precious 3-year-old son. How dare you? Then you repeatedly threatened to kill us. The fear escalated when you started tearing sheets and cloths, and I had no idea what you were planning to do with all that cloth. Strangle us, maybe? Yes, I was frozen in fear beyond description. My attention was not on the rape, but fully on where did you put my son when you removed him from the bed? Where did you put him? And what were you going to do to him?
So Joseph James DeAngelo was originally known as the Visalia Ransacker. He was in Visalia doing burglaries, cat burglaries. He was the East Bay Rapist when he moved up to Sacramento area. He was raping women, tying up their boyfriends, their husbands near the Bay Area, the San Francisco Bay Area, the Berkeley area. He was also known as the Night Stalker, and then the original Night Stalker when Richard Ramirez kind of took that name. So, and then eventually the Golden State Killer. So Joseph James DeAngelo was born in New York. His father was a sergeant in the Army. Moved to California. He was raised in Rancho Cordova, which is in the Sacramento area. Well, long story short, I don't want to go too much into his story because I really want to talk about these two murders. There were 4 total victims in these 2 murders that I'm going to cover here in Goleta. So he's a police officer for a couple of years in the outskirts of the Visalia, Tulare County area in a little town called Exeter. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. It is Exeter, which is just east of Visalia. Oftentimes, maybe an hour after his shift, he would tell his wife at the time that he was going ferret hunting, but there's some rapes and burglaries that happened an hour after his shift had ended at the local police department. He then transferred up north in the Sacramento area. It was a small town police officer up there as well. And he was caught shoplifting and then fired from his police officer position. Now, he did plead guilty. He agreed to plead guilty if the prosecution would take the death penalty off the table. So he pled guilty. These are what he pled guilty to and what he was charged for is 45 to 50 rapes from 1974 to 1986, 13 murders. So today we're going to be talking about 2 murders, 4 victims. So 2 different couples were murdered here in the Goleta area. So I'm not going to cover all of the murders and obviously all of the charges. I just wanted to give you a little background on this monster, Joseph James DeAngelo. His last crime was committed in 1986, was a murder. Through DNA and the DNA genealogy websites, I've heard rumors it was 23andMe, but of course 23andMe are going to say that they do not release DNA evidence. But in 2018, Joseph James DeAngelo was arrested after being linked to, so these old cases from the 70s and 80s had DNA, obviously from the rapes, from the murders. They had some DNA of the killer. Due to DNA evidence, they were able to charge him. So at 72 years old, he was arrested in 2018, went through, they were saying it was going to be 5 to 6 years before the trial happened. However, it wasn't that long, and he was tried for these crimes and decided to plead guilty and admit to some of the crimes. Now, they do say they believe there were more crimes committed than what he was found guilty of, what he pled guilty to, but he got multiple life sentences. Currently, he's in Corcoran, which is in the Visalia area in Kings County. I believe it might be Tulare County, but I think Kings County. But he is in Corcoran, which is where Charles Manson was the last couple of years of his life. So he's in Corcoran State Prison, hopefully rotting away. After you hear some of these crimes, you'll know why I said that. So this first case I'm going to cover is here in Goleta at condo. It was an orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Robert Offerman, and his girlfriend, who was a psychologist. She was Dr. Deborah Alexandra Manning. She went by Allie. Now, he was 44 years old. She was 35 years old. This happened on December 30th, 1979. The wee hours of December 30th, 1979. They were awakened by somebody in their room. They were both laying there in bed. Now, Robert and Allie were girlfriend, boyfriend. This was a couple days, obviously, after Christmas. They were laying in bed. The investigators found Allie's rings between the bed frame and the mattress. Robert and Allie were found the next morning by friends, as they had a day date planned with their friends to go play tennis here locally. Allie was found on the bed with her head on the right side of the bed with her head turned to the side. She had not been raped, but she had been shot in the back upper left-hand side of her head, and she was dead. Robert was at the foot of the bed on his knees. His hands were not bound, and I'll tell you why in a second. But he was shot, I've heard 3 or 4 times in the back and then in the chest. What investigators said that probably happened was, so the MO of the Golden State Killer, and I'm going to call him the Golden State Killer from now on because I don't think I deserve to say, he doesn't deserve for me to say his name all that much for the monster that he is. But the Golden State Killer, his MO was to have the woman bound the wrists and the ankles of her boyfriend, her husband, the male that was there. Investigators believe, that she left the ties loose for Robert. So, in the altercation, Robert had gotten loose, so his hands were not bound, but they did find a piece of the twine in his hand, like he had undone it. So that's why he was shot in the back. he might have got, he might have been getting undone and the Golden State Killer shot him in the back. Or he was charging at him and maybe shot him in the chest and then shot him in the back as he was at the foot of the bed. Now, after the shots rang out, he got out of there he got out of the house pretty quickly because the neighbors obviously would have heard the shots. Neighbors said that around 3 a.m. they did hear what sounded like gunshots. I don't know about you, but sometimes when you hear a gunshot, it doesn't exactly sound like a gunshot. It could be fireworks. New Year's Eve was the next night. Maybe they thought it was fireworks. People putting off fireworks in anticipation of New Year's Eve. So it doesn't sound like the authorities were called, but the Golden State Killer left the house, they're assuming within minutes, stole a neighbor's bike and took off. Now, as you can see, it's pretty woody area. On the other side of these condos is kind of an open, foresty, woodsy area. So he might have, went back there. There's a main street right here. He might have just taken off there on the bike that he stole. His MO was also to go in the kitchen and have something to eat in between rapes. And I say rapes because he would rape the woman almost until climax, stop, go into the kitchen, have something to eat, and come back maybe multiple times. So it wasn't just a quick rape. It was a rape, come back, rape again, come back, rape again. So a seriously sick individual. But the friends did find Robert and Allie deceased that next morning. The back door, the sliding door, they could tell had been pried open with a screwdriver. The condo next to the two victims was vacant at the time. So they believe the Golden State Killer broke into the vacant condo next door, waited until the lights turned off, and then went next door and broke in. So let's see that condo. So here's the back of the vacant condo that was next door to the one that Dr. Robert Offerman owned and was murdered in. And here is the condo that was broken into and where the two victims were murdered by the Golden State Killer. Now this is the backyard. There's a gate there. So right next door would have been the vacant one. Now, Allie was a clinical psychologist in Santa Maria, a nearby town just north of here. Loved by all of her patients. She worked with young children who had trauma. Like I said previously, Robert was an orthopedic surgeon. They were dating. Allie did tell a friend that she felt like she was being followed in the days leading up. So she met with her lawyer at lunch 2 days before the murder and actually wrote her will out on a napkin when visiting her lawyer. So this is the condo that Robert and Allie were murdered in. Like I said, if you kept going that way, there's like a woodsy, foresty area, so he might have rode the bike off that way and got in that way. There's a main street just past these trees. So just down the street, I'm going to take you to where the next victims were murdered in 1981. This is where they were murdered on December 30th, 1979. I wanted to note, so not this building here, but the one behind, that's where Robert and Allie were murdered. You go just up this road, kind of winds back like that to the left. There's a road up there. Now, Robert and Allie were killed December 30th. In October, there was a botched robbery/rape by the Golden State Killer. He tied up two victims there. And as he went into the kitchen, both victims were able to untie themselves. The man jumped through the window and the woman left through the front door. And then the Golden State Killer fled. So it seems like his MO, which he would kind of stalk individuals. He would get to know the surroundings, get to know their ins and outs, see if anybody was home with the woman. He would get to know them. But it seems like he was kind of in this area because that would have been his first crime. I mean, it was his first crime, but not a successful murder or rape. And then his next one was here. And then we're going to go down the street a bit to the next set of victims. Now, just on the other side of these townhomes, condos, were the condo complex where Robert and Allie were. Now, these are new. You can tell these are newer. These were not here in the 1970s. This was actually a Christmas tree lot. So, this is known as a Christmas tree farm. So, you can imagine Christmas trees everywhere. There's also a theory that the Golden State Killer had crossed through the Christmas tree farm in order to get away or even to get here. It would have been a good hiding place if he needed it, actually, for his getaway. So now, half a mile away from our last victims in 1979, July 26, 1981, Golden State Killer strikes again in Goleta. Between the time he went and he committed some murders in Irvine and Dana Point, down by Newport Beach. But he came back here to Goleta. Now, this house I'm going to take you to was owned by a family member of Cheryl Domingo, better known as Sherry Domingo, a 35-year-old mother of two, divorced, and her on-again, off-again boyfriend, Greg Sanchez, were murdered here. This was a member of Sherry's family, their home that they were selling. I believe somebody had passed away, so it was put up for sale. And Sherry had recently lost her job, so she was staying in the house until it sold here in Santa Barbara. Or actually here in Goleta. I say Goleta, the address is technically Santa Barbara. I think it's more Goleta. Her funeral services were held in Modesto. She's buried in San Diego, which is where her ex-husband is, where she was raised. Sherry's two kids split time between San Diego and Goleta, so they would spend time with their dad and spend time here with Sherry. Sherry worked at a computer firm. From what I could tell in research, it was a computer office furniture firm. She met Gregory Sanchez a few years prior. He was a electronics technician for a computer company, Burrow Computer Company, I believe it was called. And she was 35 years old. He was 27 years old. So almost 8 years her junior. However, they were on and off again. He was madly in love with her. She thought he was too young, but Sherry's daughter said that Gregory was a great guy. They got along well. He was really good with her and her brother. So sometime during that night, Golden State Killer broke into this house. Sherry and Greg were lying in bed. Greg was not a small person. He was 6'2", 6'3". He tried to rush the Golden State Killer. He was shot in the cheek and bludgeoned to death. He was hit over the head at least 24 times. It took weeks to confirm the cause of death and to confirm all the injuries because of how badly him and Sherry were beaten to death, because Sherry was also beaten to death. Now, Sherry was raped. There is a theory that he might have broken the Golden State Killer's nose in the altercation, but ultimately Greg paid the price with his life. So again, the Golden State Killer sought out his victims. He studied his victims. He studied the surroundings, and he got away once again. You gotta wait until 2018 when DNA tests finally found Joseph James DeAngelo. So let's see the house. So this is the house where Sherry was house sitting and where Greg came to visit her. And this is where they were murdered by the Golden State Killer, here in Goleta. Now, a real estate agent found the bodies at 11:30 the next morning, the morning of July 27th. The real estate agent walked in and thought she saw a male body halfway in the closet. She called her boss, and then they called the authorities. When the authorities showed up, they found Greg's deceased body, and then they pulled off a sheet. And then that's when they found Sherry's body underneath the sheet, and she had been hogtied and beaten to death. So there is the Pacific Ocean here in Santa Barbara. It's kind of a gloomy day, nice chilly day in the high 50s, about 58, 59 degrees. And Dr. Robert Offerman is buried just over here. Looks like somebody maybe has been here recently visiting. There's some maybe a week's old set of flowers here. Robert J. Offerman, MD, 1935 to 1979. Rest in peace, Dr. Offerman. 44 years old, you met a fate none of us want to see. A very undeserved end to your life. Robert was over there. Here lies his girlfriend, Dr. Deborah Alexandra Allie Manning, Taylor's daughter, 1944 to 1979, who lit up our lives with love, mother, father, and friends. And last but not least, a Catholic Calvary Cemetery here in Santa Barbara. Greg Sanchez. The memory of Greg Sanchez, 1953 to 1981. He was cremated, and then his urn was buried. So rest in peace, Greg. So thank you so much for watching this video showing you 4 victims of the Golden State Killer, previously known as the Visalia Ransacker, East Area Rapist. I do believe I said East Bay Rapist earlier. The original Night Stalker, prior to Richard Ramirez's rapes and murders. The Golden State Killer. Until next time, as seen by Dave, out.